Hi, everybody. How are you doing? This is Michelle Thorne from D.A.M.E.S. As you know, D.A.M.E.S, Differently Abled Mothers Empowerment Society, seeks to take a holistic approach to helping mothers who are raising special needs children. We do that in a variety of ways, including our webinar series, which is what you're about to watch today. So for our September webinar, we have Michelle Reed Harris, and she is going to help us with some questions about IEPs, 504s, and in Arizona, the lovely ESA. Um, and uh, and she's just going to kind of shed some light on some different questions that we have, and also tell us about her company, AESA, American, because it's American now, not just Arizona, American Exceptional Students Association, which is a company that she founded, which again also helps moms with exceptional students, guiding them through the IEP, 504, and ESA process. So Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. And I already have a list of questions from some of our members. And so I'm really excited about just talking to you, learning, about what you do, and just getting some help for these moms. So thanks for being here today.
No problem, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and introduce your business to us, what you do, how it came about, and then we can dive into some questions.
Perfect. So I run American Exceptional Students Association, and as Michelle alluded to, we initially started out as Arizona Exceptional Students Association, and I realized that the need was so great, it made sense to, kind of broaden the scope of our organization. But essentially what we are is a nonprofit. We are a 501c3, and part of what we do is to help parents with special education advocacy. We help those who are interested in the empowerment scholarship here that is unique to the state of Arizona. We also help and support families who are educating their child with exceptional needs at home. So we, help with any kind of homeschooling aspect of, that, and sort of how the empowerment scholarship runs. So part of our endeavor to do these things, we run a Facebook group called IEP/504 Assistance, where we provide free help with special education advocacy and questions. And we also host a conference called the Empowering Exceptional Students of America, and that'll be in June of 2020. And in that convention, actually, it is all about how you educate your child with exceptional needs at home. And our theme this year is Funner in the Summer, which I'm really great and excited about, because that was something my daughter came up with. And though it's not grammatically correct, it does bring up the point, though, that homeschooling should be fun, and we're not just to take literally public school, and recreate it at home, but there are ways we can inject fun and joy and innovation into our homeschooling so that our child is stimulated in learning. So those are just some of the activities that we do as an organization. There's a
Okay.
lot of other things, but you guys are welcome to visit our website and find out more about us. And so it's AESA.group. We are, instead of .com or .org or something, we're .group. So
Okay.
it's a little different, but you will find us right there at .group.
Awesome. So I think just to kind of start out, let's go over the differences between what an IEP is and what a 504 is, and how they make a determination about who gets what.
Right. So that's a big question. Okay, so really, like the simplest way to kind of distill that down is, when do you need a 504 versus an IEP? And a lot of people don't realize you can put related services into a 504. You will hear, different people or agencies say, services are not included in a 504, but they absolutely are. You can get OT, you can get speech services in a 504. What you don't get, or what shouldn't be happening in a 504, because I have heard of this happening, but they shouldn't be happening, which is goals. So you can have the service, but you wouldn't have goals because there's no law under 504 that you have to come back and revisit these things annually. And so that's the reason any kind of goals should always be under an IEP,
Okay.
because the law states you must come back and revisit these and see, are they working? Is it helping? So that's one of the reasons, you might need an IEP versus a 504 if you need goals. The other reason that you would need an IEP versus a 504 is if your child needs modified instruction. Now, there's a lot of confusion as to like what constitutes modified instruction. So if I guess one of the biggest things I hear people get confused about is if your child has, say, an open-ended essay question, and then you ask them to modify the format of the test so that it's not an open-ended essay question, but maybe a series of multiple choice questions. So people would say that's a modification. Actually, it's not. It's an accommodation.
Okay.
If, now here is the if to that. If the multiple choice questions are on the same level as the essay question. We didn't simplify it. We didn't try to make the material easier. It's the same academic level of the question. You see, it's just rewritten into a different format. That's an accommodation, not a modification. But if you needed that essay question broken down into something simpler, have the answer be something simpler, less complex, then that would be modifying the curriculum, modifying the question. And then you need an IEP to do modifications. Only under an IEP is modification of work allowed.
Okay. So it's more about the content of the work and not how the work is formed.
Correct.
Okay. Very
Yes.
good.
And I was
Okay.
going to say that's the huge misunderstanding all the time.
Yeah, and I could see how, I mean, I could see how it could be too. But that was a really good explanation of why those are two separate things.
Two separate things.
And the idea, and IEPs are protected under the IDEA law, right? Where
Correct.
50 is the 504 even governed by laws?
Yes. So it is the
Right.
federal law under which it's governed is the Rehabilitation Act.
Okay, perfect.
So that's where you can find that information. And then also on our website, we have blog posts every month that are free. So some of the blog posts are standard, they're always there every month for free. Other blog posts I add in, so I kind of rotate some of the other posts around from our archives to free posts each month. And in our free posts every month, I have special education terms to know. And it is a 3-part series because I had asked my IEP group, hey, as parents who are now involved in this IEP process, what are special education terms you wish you had known
Yeah,
but weren't familiar with in the beginning? And so I took and gathered up all of the terms that they had suggested and then defined them. And it took me kind of 3 posts
sure.
to be able to go through them all. Yeah,
Yeah,
it took me almost a month to write the series of 3 posts. So when you go and read the posts, they're great for helping you to understand not only special education jargon, and that's something you do want to be fluent in, because I feel like one way for the IEP team to take you seriously and for you to be seen as a knowledgeable person is to be fluent in the jargon in which they use.
yeah,
So you can go read these posts. They will help you out. They will define all of those terms. And then part of the reason it took me so long to write them is because my posts are very research based. And so embedded in the posts are hyperlinks to all the reference material I use to write the posts. So, if you ever want to learn more about something when you're reading one of our posts, just click on those hyperlinks. They'll take you to that reference material. And
yeah.
so I do talk about the difference between IEP and 504, the different sets of laws, along with many other special education terms that
Awesome.
parents are also they're dying to know. So this will really kind of break that down for you guys.
Very cool. Yeah, and if you have not seen one of Michelle's blogs, you have to see it to believe it because it is like hyperlink, and you're just like, oh, sweet. Like it is an encyclopedia at your fingertips, which is awesome.
Yeah, I pull
Yeah,
literally all the best stuff essentially I can find from the internet and then put it into those blog posts so that parents have those as references. Good, credible, research based or law based references that they can cite.
yeah,
Because as I tell people, you don't ever cite me, you don't cite Wright's Law, you don't say, well, Wright's Law said. The school doesn't care what Wright's Law said, but
yeah,
the school does care when you point to a law statute and said, this says, they'll
yeah,
pay attention to that. So it's really important to make sure you got those good, credible, research-based or law-based um, statutes or things that you can point at and say, no, this is why I'm having a problem. You violated these things.
yeah. Well, we talked earlier before we started the recording about the difference between educational and medical, not, I wouldn't say they're diagnoses, but autism, right? So it's like you can have a medical diagnosis for autism, but the school might find that you do not meet the criteria for getting services because of the educational diagnosis. I guess I wouldn't say, but I will let you cover that.
Yes, so it's one of the things that's really confusing to parents. They don't understand because they're like, hey, we have gone over here and we've had a neuropsychologist give a medical diagnosis of autism. And they don't realize the criteria for a medical diagnosis of autism is listed under the DSM-5. So that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, DSM-5, the 5th edition. And in there, it lists the criteria a child must meet in order to be considered medically to have autism. So that's one set of criteria. When the school uses is something called an educational eligibility. They don't make diagnoses. They can't. They're not doctors. But they actually can make educational determinations, educational eligibility. And a lot of these definitions are defined under IDEA, under federal law. And those that are not defined under federal law, then it's your state law, because your state can make additional categories. So under IDEA, there's 13
Hmm.
categories. Autism is one of them. That's defined under federal law. But the states can go on and further refine those definitions. Then they cannot limit them. They cannot make them more strict than the federal definition. That's actually against the law because there's something called the Supremacy Clause in the United States Constitution that gives federal law precedence over state law. Okay. So the states can't make it more restrictive, but they can better define and make it more inclusive. So, do keep an eye on your state laws because some of them, it's a little questionable as to whether they are more restrictive. But again, you look at that federal definition, you look at your state's definition of educational eligibilities. And I tell people all the time, if you need help finding these things, come let me know. I will help you find what your state's definition for education eligibilities are. And then as the parent, you really should take the time to really read through the entire list and see, does it make sense that your child fits the autism category? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Yeah,
And if they don't, then what category do you think they should fit into? Right. And then that's when you go to the IEP meeting to make that eligibility determination. You want to then argue for the category that makes the most sense, where your child fits. And that's where the school should be placing them too. So if a child has high functioning autism, the school may not see that they fit the educational eligibility for autism, but may fit the educational eligibility for OHI because they mostly present with issues of executive functioning and ADHD. Or they may determine that they're more SLI, speech language impairment, because they have more issues with, speaking and the social pragmatic communication aspect and understanding social norms and nonverbal body language. So that's how a child with a medical diagnosis of autism, though, can wind up in different educational eligibilities in an IEP that aren't autism.
Okay.
Does that
Awesome.
make sense?
Yeah. So let's look at Michelle's question that she kind of put up there. I think it's funny with three Michelles in here right now.
It's a good name.
Right?
Michelle. All right.
Only, of course, my mother decided to only give me one L.
That's
That's
okay.
okay.
We still love you anyways.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, so she writes, I am new to this and I have a 504 first meeting tomorrow with my daughter's school, and just learning what kind of accommodations she could look for and add. And that's a really interesting question. What are the first 504 meetings like? What do they look like?
So sometimes a school will put together a whole 504 plan for your child and they don't even involve you. One of the things that I don't care for 504 plans is the fact that, again, there's no requirement to come back and revisit the plan. So the parent has to initiate that to make it happen. There is no really kind of set procedures set out in how to conduct a 504 meeting, how to do parental involvement, how to do evaluations, how to do any of that. It's not laid out nicely as it is under IDEA. Now, the Office of Civil Rights, which is, and this is under the U.S. Department of Education, because there's several Office of Civil Rights for each federal agency. So under the U.S. Department of Education, they have something called the Office of Civil Rights. And the Office of Civil Rights wrote a manual for Section 504, and it's like the Parent and Educator's Guide to, I think it's like primary and secondary education for Section 504. I mean, it's like a really long name. But I will pull that and I will share the link for you. But that's what you want to read, because by far that is where you have, I think, the best information, because it was written by an authoritative source. It's the Office of Civil Rights. It is great information in here. This is 52 pages long. It is a very long document. And even I think I had to read it 3 times over to really kind of absorb all the information in the document. But this is how I know that related services, such as occupational therapy or speech, can be in a 504. It's covered in this document.
Okay.
So it also covers some other really important information. And Michelle, is it Beardorf? Beardoff? Sorry if I murdered your last name, but I just want to point out to you, if you go in here and you, because I posted the link, and if you go in here on page 11, it talks about key features of FAPE. So FAPE is a free, appropriate public education. And so it talks about what are key features of FAPE under Section 504, because it does look a little different than under IDEA. And one of the first things it lists and says is evaluation and placement procedures that guard against misclassification or inappropriate placement of students. So my first question to you, since you're talking about the school is offering you a 504, is have they evaluated your child in any way, or did you just bring in a doctor's diagnosis and hand it to the school and they're saying we're going to give you a 504? Because they really should be conducting evaluations on your child to make sure that your child only needs a 504 and not an IEP. And often schools will skip this step.
Hmm.
So it is very common that parents will bring in, say, a diagnosis from a doctor for ADHD, and then the school says, oh, we have your diagnosis, here is your 504. No, that is not how that works. They should be conducting evaluations also to make sure this is all that your child needs, which is why I encourage people, you really should, like, there's nothing wrong with getting a 504. You can get the 504 and get it in place because it's quick.
Yeah.
Compared to the IEP process, it is super quick. But what you probably also want to do is then submit a letter requesting formal evaluations under IDEA. to make sure they do it and conduct a full psychoeducational evaluation of your child to make sure there aren't underlying issues as to why your child is having their learning difficulties. And Michelle didn't mention why she's being offered a 504. There are medical diagnoses. So, I started off like a lot of what I do from starting off doing medical advocacy for my children. So I have surviving quadruplets who all have special needs. And I had to medically advocate for them in order to get them the things and services and medical diagnoses actually I needed in order to open doors for services for them. And one of the things that, we kind of struggled with was also getting appropriate evaluations done. And it's so important to make sure that you do get these appropriate evaluations done because there are many children, especially girls, say, who have autism, who kind of float under the radar for a long time until they wind up having so many difficulties in school. There are a lot of children who have ADHD who are given a 504, but really needed an IEP because they're struggling so severely with executive functioning and with self-regulation that they need goals in order to have, to they need goals in order for someone to have something measurable to show progress that they're working on these executive functioning deficits, this issues with self-regulation. And it's so important because if your child has problems with self-regulation, whether it's physical self-regulation or emotional, kind of behavioral self-regulation, that will impede their ability to make friends and to retain a job. And those are completely things that should be addressed under, like IDEA. So those are why, I encourage people, go get those evaluations done. Ask the school to conduct the evaluations. And if they come back and tell you, well, your child's grades are too good, we're not going to do the evaluations, your child makes good grades, that is not a reason to be denied the evaluation. Grades are just one item that should be considered as an overall picture when they're making that decision as to whether to conduct those evaluations.
Okay. That's really good to know. So, okay, so I have a son who has an IEP, right? So when we walk into our IEP meeting, like you said, we have goals that are kind of written down and, we know what we're working on and working towards and all of the different accommodations that he's getting at school. So when you walk into a 504 meeting, are you given a list of goals or you said, no, you're not, right? So
No,
what
you're
are you
not.
doing?
No, they just come in and go, we feel like your child would benefit from these accommodations. And usually they're generic accommodations. They're like, preferential seating. Woo, so what? That's not really going to help your child per se, right? There are things like, sit closer to the teacher. Well, again, that may not be enough to sufficiently help your child. There's some very just kind of generic things. And so this is why I encourage people to come to me, because usually I have tons of references, tons of resources, and I can give you a lot of that information. If you only need a 504 plan, usually I have a lot of ideas for accommodations for a child once I understand what their medical diagnoses are,
Yeah.
because I have done so much research and there's so much peer reviewed information essentially available online that for a lot of these medical diagnoses, there have been papers written about, this medical diagnosis tends to have these learning disabilities.
Yeah.
And I've brought a lot of that information together and correlated a lot of that information together for parents.
Okay. And Michelle, while we're on here, if you want to share a little more or if you want to ask more specific questions, please feel free to do that. This is a safe place. And you brought up something, Michelle, that I have honestly been very worried about. So both of my children have autism. My son needs more support, uses an Alcom device, gets lots of assistance at school, is in a self-contained classroom. My daughter is 3, so we're not there yet. But I still haven't gotten her through DDD because honestly, I'm worried that she's not going to qualify because she's a girl with autism, and I feel like a lot of those questions are not geared towards girls with autism, right? And so then I also worry about this component too. It's like, will she fall into a 504 or will she fall into an IEP? Because I feel like girls are just evaluated so differently. So how do you combat that?
You do. And so the main way, I mean, you're right about all of those things. Girls and women present very differently when, the symptoms of autism than boys, or can present very differently. And this is something that a lot of the diagnostic tests don't really take into consideration. And what's even worse, in my opinion, like, this is well known. This isn't like it's not known. Actually, this is pretty well known and documented. But yet, the schools, of course, have not caught up. So, one of the things, and I will share here, is it's a list of resources. Did it? I think it got cut off here. There were so many. There was so many. It didn't like it in the comments. So I'm just going to kind of fix that. And then let me share with you. Where did that stop? Journal articles. So I wanted to share with you this list of resources. These are something that I've compiled together. These are free resources um, that are easy to access. These are various peer-reviewed journal articles along with some well-known respectable websites discussing why girls with autism are often overlooked,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes kind of applying the school with enough of that information can be helpful.
Okay.
So sometimes the school psychologists will look at it and take it into consideration, and then sometimes they don't. Also, I've written a blog post essentially for those who are members of AESA, because this month it's not listed for free. But as I said, I kind of rotate the blog posts around.
Yeah.
And if I know there's interest and people ask me directly, normally I will then kind of bump these posts into being a free post. But I wrote a post, and then again, it's like a research-based post on girls with autism. And it was very interesting writing this, because one of the papers I found was women who had grown up, and wasn't until much later in life who were then diagnosed with autism, along with a study talking about neurotypical mothers who were raising a child with autism, and kind of looking at these perspectives of their life and how they grew up. So it was really interesting and fascinating article to kind of, read these journal articles and then pull that information together to write this post.
Very cool.
But it was fascinating listening to kind of the struggles the moms went through, not understanding what was going on, and what a relief it was when their child finally achieved their autism diagnosis, medical diagnosis. But often this didn't happen until sometime between the ages of 7 to 12.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe they diagnosed my daughter so early and they caught it, because I went into that appointment thinking she was totally typical. And as she was going through the ADOS, I was just like, crap, okay, so we got another one. But it was a revelation to us. I mean, we went in not having any idea that she had autism because it looked so different.
It looks very different. Well, and one of the things, and one of the main reasons that they say a girl who has autism is picked up early, they receive a medical diagnosis early, is usually due to deficits in social interaction.
Mm,
A lot of times girls with autism have better social interaction than their male counterparts at that same age. And then also girls, neurotypical girls, are more accepting and inclusive of other girls who maybe stand out,
mm,
so they're not quite normal. Their behavior seems odd, but it doesn't deter typically girls from interacting with that child. Whereas boys, they'll usually wind up with bullying.
yeah.
So that's part of the reason why girls with autism sort of float by, because they'll seem to be engaged with peers. And so everybody sort of misses it. But if you watch really carefully what's going on, it's not that the child is engaged with peers, it's the peers are engaging the child.
Yeah,
And that's not quite the same thing. There's not that reciprocal, right, social communication.
totally. Yeah.
So it's a lot more subtle and it's hard to find. And that's where you have to be well aware, not only what the medical definition for autism is, but then also you should be aware of what these testing instruments are and the questions when you read them. Like, what is it really asking?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people read it and try to answer them literally verbatim. And I'm like, no, that's not really what the question is going for, you know? So you have to really kind of think about like, what is this question truly asking? And then how maybe should I answer this question? Because when you have a girl with autism, the ADOS is not geared. And again, this is well known and it's in peer reviewed research. It is not geared to find and determine eligibility really for girls.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's some really interesting stuff on that end. So definitely take time and kind of poke through that research and those articles that I listed there. I
Yeah,
think you'll
that's
find
an
it interesting.
amazing list. I cannot, like, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to download all of these today and read them because,
Yeah, no, I literally I have so much information it blows people away. I have a Dropbox folder full of peer-reviewed journal articles, both medical and educational, on pretty much any topic that relates to special education.
it's awesome. So Michelle added a little bit more information. I'm going to give you a minute to read it, and then we can kind of circle back. I can.
Oh, okay. So I'm just going to kind of read bits and I'm going to respond to like portions of Michelle's question until we kind of make it all the way through. And this is often what I do in my group, by the way. I literally just copy and paste someone's question and then I just break it down and start answering each part of it. Part of it is because it always drives me nutty when I ask a question to someone and they don't answer my entire question. They just answer part of it. So my ADHD, my best way is just to go through the question. So she talks about our daughter is a junior in high school and has an ADHD diagnosis. So that is an executive functioning deficit. That's what ADHD is. That's the hallmark of ADHD is executive functioning deficit. And then she was given a social communication disorder. So that's the social pragmatic communication disorder. And it was funny because Michelle and I recently attended an Autism Society event where I spoke, and I was saying, this is my most hated medical diagnoses, I think, in existence at the moment. And I think it's because it keeps children from getting that medical autism diagnosis.
Yeah.
They shuttle them off because we used to have Asperger. And so now they shuttle them off into the social pragmatic communication disorder. And what happens is they miss that autism medical diagnosis. And that keeps them from basically opening doors into a lot of other potential support and services. And I think that's a real shame. And it really bothers me. So, if your daughter does have a social pragmatic communication disorder and ADHD, those are two co occurring conditions that are common with autism. And you may want to, Michelle, go back and kind of read through these links that I've listed up above about girls and autism and look and see, does this match your daughter? Um, because my feeling is you probably will see a lot of your daughter in those posts. Anyways, though, she goes on to say that she definitely struggles with reading body language as well as focus. We completed the 504 paperwork from her psychologist, and basically the school counselor and her teachers are agreeing to meet with us tomorrow, though they do say that her grades are really good. Again, don't let them throw you off with that because grades are not the end all be all to deciding whether a child needs an IEP. This is something that people really get confused, and I'm going to give you a resource here because you're going to want to review and read that. But grades are just one consideration. And as I said, and you have already mentioned, she has issues with nonverbal body language. She has issues with just social interaction, probably reciprocal social interaction. She already has issues with ADHD, so she has problems with executive functioning. So that's, kind of being unorganized, not being on time, not keeping up with her stuff. All of these things impairs her ability to successfully retain and keep a job. She probably, if she has ADHD, has issues with taking in and remembering verbal information. Like, she does better if it's written down, but if you give her verbal information, she probably doesn't follow through very well. All of these things together really, to me, point to she needs an IEP. She doesn't need a 504. What she needs is an IEP. She needs something more than just accommodations. What she needs is goals. She needs goals in executive functioning. She needs goals in speech. She should be working on nonverbal body language, social pragmatic communication, reciprocal social communication. And this is all something too that I cover. I have a blog post on our site on autism and educational eligibility. And that may be a blog post that you want to read, because in that I really go in depth about how schools essentially kind of miss that whole social pragmatic communication. And it's an important and very essential part of what a child needs when they're done with school. And I feel like she's missing that. Now, part of the reason at this point, the school is going to try to dissuade you from getting an IEP. I can already hear some of these arguments. So one of the things we're going to tell you is that she has good grades. Well, again, it doesn't matter, right? And so read that link from Wright's Law. I think they do really well at explaining why grades isn't the end all be all as to why your child does or does not get an IEP. Second, they're going to tell you that they can accommodate her. And though that may be true, again, she needs goals, because she's getting to a point where she needs to, in a measurable way, work on these things that are going to potentially hold her back from living independently and from keeping a job, or even going on to further employment. Now, there's reasons why I'm saying these things, these words, this verbiage specifically. And that's because when you look at the purpose of IDEA, which the schools like to forget what the purpose of IDEA is. And the purpose, it says, is to ensure that all children with disabilities have the ability, or have available to them, free appropriate public education, FAPE, like we mentioned earlier, that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. That is literally the purpose of IDEA. And again, this is not something that the schools often, they'll play dumb. Hey, if it doesn't happen here in the educational environment, it never happens. No, that's not true. You just need somebody to document besides you, because the school doesn't like to listen to the parent, but they'll listen to pretty much anybody else. And they need documentation to show, no, these are things that are going to impair my child and keep them from getting that further education, employment, or independent living. Another thing they're going to look at you and tell you is, well, is your child going on to college? If they're going on to college, you don't want the IEP. Don't get it. Because if you get the IEP, they're not going to translate into services anyways. You need a 504. This is not true. Don't let them tell you this. So what happens is when your child goes on to college, okay, a lot of people will take the 504, but one, you can get that at your senior year right before you end, if you really want to. Two, you can actually take the IEP to the Disability Services Center at the university, and they will pull out what are accommodations for from the IEP, because a lot of people don't understand. And again, it's in this parent guide here under section 504 that I gave earlier, that it talks about a well-written IEP encompasses 504 accommodations in the IEP. Okay, so all of your accommodations in your IEP are 504 accommodations. So those are the things that a college should be able to give your child just by having an IEP. All right. So again, don't let them kind of dissuade you from that. And then, they'll throw out, I'm sure, some other things. But again, what you need to do is just give them a written request. You can't verbally ask, never verbally ask the school for anything. Always have it in writing, because that's what helps build your document trail in case you need to pursue a state complaint or go to due process. So you want to write out a written letter asking them to assess your child. And in my IEP group, I encourage you to come there, because I have like tons of resources in what are called learning units that are in the group. And so I have a learning unit for autism. I have a learning unit for ADHD. And then there I have a blurb about what you should request if you want your child assessed for an IEP. So, because you want to request specific areas of the school to assess. Because if you just say, hey, I want you to assess my child for autism or ADHD, they won't do a full complete evaluation. That's just the way they work. They just won't do it. And so the only way, and that's also against the law, because they are required by law to test for all suspected disabilities. But like I said, they rarely do that. And there are medical journal articles that show, though, like these interconnectedness, right, of a medical diagnosis and these learning disabilities. So I pulled all that together into these blurbs so that parents can just kind of copy and paste it into a form letter that we have, because I also have a form letter too.
You're making it real easy for us. Thank you, Michelle.
Well, these are all questions I get commonly asked. And so
Yeah.
as I get common questions in my group, what I do is I write blog posts to address these things so that I can point parents there and say, go read these. These are a comprehensive resource for you to, where, like, again, embedded in there's all the research I use to write the article. And I try to list like everything I would want to know. And I'm very nosy. I want to know everything. So, if I list everything I want to know in the post, I figured I'm answering about like 95 to 99% of the questions people would ask. And then, of course, they're always free to come by my IEP group and you can ask there too.
Okay. So Denise is on her iPhone. So Denise, I unmuted you really quickly just to see if you had any questions, because I'm not sure if you can type into the chat box.
No questions yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Michelle, another question that I had, because we're seeing it more and more in the news these days with kids kind of getting left on the bus, kids kind of, having issues at school. And I know more parents are now kind of turning towards these angel devices or tracking devices or even listening devices. How much, especially the listening devices, is that legal?
Okay. No, that actually is a really great question, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because the laws vary by state, and you really need to be careful when you're doing this, because in Arizona, we are a one-party consent state. So if the recording is happening, that's all the notice that you need. But other states are two-party consent states, in which both parties have to give consent in order to record. And also, if you record, say, over the phone without giving notice, depending on, again, what state you're in, it can be considered a violation of federal law and wiretapping. So you have to really kind of watch, like, what is your state's law? And I do help parents with that information. I'm going to see here. Let's see if I can pull. There's a few different great resources, and I know one of them, and I'm going to see if I can find it here in my list of stuff while we're chatting. But there was put together by their school attorneys. So apparently, like, there's attorneys, and then there's specifically school attorneys who focus on educational law, which makes sense, right? They're the ones who are usually defending the school districts.
Yeah.
But what's great is that these school attorneys, they put stuff online. And so when they put things online, that means I can usually find whatever it is that they put online. And they had this really great article. Matter of fact, I did find it. So it's the Council of School Attorneys. It's COSA, COSA. So that's the name of their organization. And they have a list of, I think they're just articles essentially that have been written as sort of white papers as general guidance for the school attorneys. But what's nice is many of these papers are completely available to the public. And so one of them is the recording devices in schools.
How
So,
apropos.
I know, right? I'm like, completely answers your question. And what's great is this was just presented in April of 2018.
Nice.
So this is, new information basically. And it talks in here about recording devices. So even if your state law does not forbid recording devices, often you will have a school district policy, right, that will forbid recording devices. Now, can I tell you, don't ever send your child with, not don't ever send them to school without a recording device? No, I can't, because if things are happening to your child and you can't get straight answers, that may be one of the very few ways you might get some insight and clue into what's going on. Because one of the common things that's really happening, and I see it more and more, and personally, I find it a bit scary, and part of the reason why we homeschool our children. I'm a special education advocate. My husband is a public school teacher. Yet, what do? We homeschool our children. Now, in the state of Arizona, they make it especially easy for us to do so because we do have that empowerment scholarship account. And so I get funds that are designated for the school, they're paid to me, and then I get to utilize them to homeschool my children.
Yeah.
And that's unique to the state of Arizona. And though there are 5 other states that have an ESA program, usually that money only pays for a private school. It doesn't go to the parent to use to educate their child at home. So we really do have a very unique program in that aspect. But like I was saying, though, it's getting to where schools aren't even allowing parents in to even step foot onto school campus. And I just had a complaint of that recently by one of my parents in my group, that they're like, I'm trying to get into the school campus and they're refusing to allow me access. Can they do that?
Yeah.
Well, yes, they can.
Yeah.
They can if it's their policy, and you would see that policy in reading your child's student handbook.
Okay.
So when your student handbook comes home, make sure you read that sucker from front to back cover. I know it seems silly, and I know it seems like you shouldn't need to do this, but when you run into a problem, it is one of the first places that I will tell people to go refer to, and it's due to these school district policies. So, usually there is some kind of visitation policy that's in place. So you need to abide by whatever it says when it comes to that visitation policy. And this comes also to classroom observations. So one of our free blog posts this month, because I had several people in my group who were looking for this information also, is I wrote a post about parental observations in the public school classroom.
Interesting.
And so the in the public school classroom, like I said, often they'll try to keep you from getting access to the classroom and observing in the classroom. And one of the first things they tell you typically is it's a violation of FERPA of the other students. But I just want to tell you that's not true. FERPA is very limited in what it covers. FERPA only covers written educational records. That's all
Interesting.
FERPA actually covers. So it needs to be an educational record. Now, there are, because now we have videos, right? And so, like, one parent in my group brought up about an incident that happened on a school bus where her child was bullied and jumped and beaten by 3 other students. And so, in that case, the parent wanted to access and view the video, and the school district's denying her to be able to view the video. And I asked her, why, and I don't think I heard back from that particular instance, but normally it comes down to this FERPA. They'll claim FERPA for the other 3 students who are in the video, but the government, FERPA itself, so there's like a compliance division under the U.S. Department of Education. There is a compliance division for FERPA, for student privacy, and they have information on their site. And it tells you very clearly when there are multiple students in an incident that has been video recorded by the school, and the school considers that an educational record, then they have to allow the parent to access and view that educational record, because you are allowed to view everything that is in your child's educational file that is considered an educational record. And that includes this video. And so the school is entitled to not give you a copy. They don't have to give you a copy, all right? But you are entitled to view it. The school could potentially redact the video, like fuzz the faces of the other students. They are allowed to do that. However, if it destroys the meaning of the video in doing so, or they're trying to edit it in such a way that it destroys the meaning of the video, they are not allowed to do that, and they must show you the video in full as is.
How interesting. Because I know, like in preschool with my son who's nonverbal, an incident happened between him and another student. And they were like, well, we can't tell you who the student is. And I was like, but if he was a typical child and he could speak, he could tell me who the typical, who the child was who did this to him. But because he's nonverbal, I don't ever get to find out. I was like, how is that? How is that right? That just doesn't seem right. I don't know.
No, and that's the thing, actually. Okay, so again, the school isn't supposed to be sharing personal information, right? So that's a little bit different. But they should be doing some kind of write-up. When your child is assaulted in school, there should be some kind of write-up and you should be able to get a copy of that. Now, the other student's name could be redacted out of it,
Yeah.
but you should be able to get a copy of like what happened.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes the schools don't even want to hand that over, but, and a lot of times now, there's no regulation that requires them to write these incidences up. There might be school district policy that requires it, but there's not any kind of there's not any kind of federal law. There's usually not any kind of state law. So it comes down to school district policy and what the school district requires. So to find that information out, that's normally a phone call to the district itself. And to find out, what is their policy when, a child is bullied. And then on that other end, if your child is continuing to be assaulted by a particular student, you absolutely can file a bullying complaint. And again, the first thing I tell people to do is to look back in that student handbook that you were given for your school district. And it should have in there whatever it is that you need to do to file a bullying complaint.
Okay.
So I would file that and then watch the school. Is the school doing something about the bullying complaint? If they're not, the next thing you want to do is write them a little more terse letter and be a little more aggressive and say they must address this. And then I have resources that is guidance from the Office of Civil Rights that specifically discusses bullying and even harassment. Okay, so it doesn't even need to rise quite to the level of bullying, just harassment alone is something that can be addressed by the Office of Civil Rights through a complaint.
Okay.
And so if the school does not take care of it and you send them a letter saying, I'm going to file an Office of Civil Rights complaint for bullying if you do not address the situation immediately, and they still don't, absolutely file for the Office of Civil Rights complaint.
Okay. I have one more question that one of our members put in. She said that when her student or when her child is acting out in school, what they're doing is as a punishment is they're taking away like recess and PE. Are they
Yes.
legally allowed to do that? I thought that was illegal.
It depends, again, to your state
Okay.
and district policies.
Okay.
So like in our state, in Arizona, the governor signed 2 recess periods a day. And in theory, it sounds good. But what they don't tell you is in these 2 recess periods a day, how long they are. They just have to be given 2 recess periods in a day, like in the elementary school level. And so what they're doing is taking the full recess block in a lot of places and they're splitting it. So you get 15 minutes here and you get 15 minutes here.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I can't say that I think that's a bad idea. And that way too, if you are in trouble, hopefully you only miss one block in that too. So. But there are other places though in which that's the only time they ever go out. They get this one shot a day to go and get out. There is, again, peer-reviewed information discussing particularly children who have ADHD. So, and that's a common co-occurring condition with autism, right? That executive functioning deficit. And so there is just tons of peer-reviewed articles out there that discuss the importance of that physical activity. And then not only that, you can actually argue for you can get recreational therapy as a related service put into your child's IEP so that somebody is working with them during PE to help them with social interaction. You can do OT push-in services for social interaction during PE. You can work on speech as a push-in service, potentially again in that social component. Also have a blog post that I wrote, because again, this does come up a lot in my group, called Don't Take Away Recess. And in that blog post, I discuss some of these peer-reviewed journal articles and then other ideas that could be done for a child as kind of punishment. Whoop, one of my kitties here. As punishment instead of taking away recess. Because, like I said, there's just so many other things that could be done, and taking away recess really should be, really, honestly, should never be an option.
I always feel like it just exacerbates the issue, right? They're probably acting out because they're stressed, they're overwhelmed, they need to like run around. Like
they need that break.
yeah.
And then the other issue is that you will just usually escalate behaviors by denying them recess. It's one of the few times they get to just sort of let go and go have fun. And so if they know that you're now, we've whacked this off, there is no recess for you, then you can have meltdowns and other really ugly behavior, all because you denied recess.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to cut out what is a preferred activity. And one of the few ways in which they can kind of release all this pent up, sensory and frustration and anxiety or whatever they've got going on, they need that time just to unwind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would push back and then again sort of look through this article. I'm sitting here trying to remember. I don't remember if this article is free or not, but I did want to point out we are having a membership discount where it's 50% off all of our membership tiers with the promo code of back to school. And we worked hard on that promo code. It was very original of us, back to school.
He's clever duck.
I know, right? So with the back to school promo code, it literally, you can get like a year's access to all of our blog posts, because our blog archives is only for paid members. It's like $12.50 for the entire year
Awesome.
with that promo code. So
very cool. Yeah, that's really awesome. Like I've said, you guys, it's well worth the $12.50. The blog posts are amazing. They're so well researched, and that's what you did prior to being an advocate, right, Michelle? What is your background exactly in?
Yes. So interestingly enough, my background is I have a degree in geology, a degree in earth science, a minor in biology, and a master's degree in environmental policy and management. And so what I did professionally is that I was a NEPA compliance officer for the state of Arizona for transportation projects. So when you have these big roadwork projects, somebody is in charge of making sure these projects are environmental compliance. And that's what I did. So my focus was environmental law. And so as my children were developing, I just sort of kind of turned my attention from environmental law to special education law. It's just another area of law.
Yeah.
And kind of started my study of special education law until I was pretty well versed in it, and then kind of got more and more into advocacy.
Yeah, it's one of the things I really appreciate about what you do in the service that you provide, is because everything that you do is all research based and all kind of encompassing in this like peer reviewed journal studied. So things are always very well studied. And like you said, that's the kind of stuff that has the most impact, especially when you talk to, people in your district, you're trying to get stuff done. If you point to peer reviewed studies, it means a lot of weight. It gives a lot of weight to your argument.
It gives a lot more weight to your argument. Now, I mean, keep in mind, like for medical peer reviewed studies, the schools only have to kind of consider that information, but there are a lot of peer reviewed educational based studies that the schools definitely give a lot of credibility to, because these are journals or whatever that are educational. I mean, there's a journal for school psychologists, and I regularly go into that journal and pilfer information out of there, because there's a lot of great things that are going on. And often you will find, whether it is a medical specialist or your school psychologist, that these professionals don't keep up professionally with whatever the newest stuff and information is out there. And that's kind of my area of focus. I look for what is that new stuff that's going on. Again, I mentioned that I have surviving quadruplets who have special needs. Well, one of my sons, he is considered medically complex and medically undiagnosable. We're still trying to figure out what all is going on with him. He has been, all three of my surviving quadruplets have been diagnosed with autism. But, autism is just kind of a sliver of the picture of them as a whole. And and there are kind of many thoughts in the world of autism, but I am more of the one who believes that autism is a list of symptoms. And there are a lot of reasons that a child can exhibit the list of symptoms that are autism, and so how your child gets there can be a whole variety of ways. And I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't found one unifying. It's not like, well, we can go this one genetic test, well, that's definitive and everybody will have. No, I don't think we can. I think it's because there are a lot of factors that go into it, and so therefore it's not that clean and easy.
Yeah.
But it does, to me, point to the need, though, to do, if your child is diagnosed medically with autism, do more investigation, look into it more, and see, are there underlying causes for why your child has autism? So, for my son, Joseph, we have some ideas. I don't have the full picture because he's not medically diagnosable. We don't understand quite all that's going on with him. But like for my daughter, Margaret, we found out that she had hypoxic brain injury, and a lot of how that presents, her brain injury presents that's why she's considered to have autism, because a lot of that brain injury presents itself as those symptoms of autism.
Yeah.
She's considered, classically autistic. They listed her as level 1 autism, but they're like, she's right there at that level 1, level 2. So she has some pretty significant needs.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today, Michelle. Those are some really great answers and resources, and I cannot wait. Like I said, I'm going to download all of those things on Girls on Autism and read them, because I have so many worries about that, but that's such a wonderful resource. And I appreciate you being here and answering questions. And if you guys don't have any other questions, we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, and I'm going to also leave you, Michelle, because I mentioned it, so I want to make sure that you do have this as a resource. But the DSM-5's definition for medical autism, I did want to leave that for you, because it's not necessarily super readily available to find on the
Awesome.
internet. So I want to give you that information so that way you can read what it says specifically is the diagnostic criteria for medical autism. And then again, that'll help you, because you can read through that and then look and say, what are some instances I can see like this in my daughter? So that when you do have that medical determination, you can put together, because what I urge parents to do is make a bulleted list. You can even put in here like social reciprocity or whatever. It's one of the things that's listed in this DSM-5 definition. And then as a bulleted list, just list examples of how your daughter shows that. And so that way, these parents, you don't forget, and you can come in with this bulleted list and then just go here and give it to the evaluator.
Yeah.
And like, don't write up huge I know this is Ash. She likes to be my shoulder kitty. This is one of those things though that you don't want to write up some huge write up, and a lot of parents will do that. They'll write all this, 2 pages about their child. No one's going to read it, whether it's a medical doctor or the school. No one's going to sit down and read all of that information verbatim, but they're more likely to skim over and read a bulleted list. So when you are trying to write things to a medical doctor or even to the school, try to keep it, and think about it like, if I had to text this to you, what's the shortest way I can give you this information that's the most concise way and the shortest way? That's how you want to write whatever information that you're sharing.
Yeah.
So Dorothy here, she said, my son, he has autism level 2, gets shortchanged with services in school and out because of his high IQ. Suggestions. So honestly, when it comes to high cognition, there is guidance from the Office of Civil Rights. They're great in the Office of Civil Rights. They cover so many things. But there is guidance that specifically says children with high cognition and who also have a disability, they're considered twice exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
That they too are, supposed to be given an IEP and given services that meets their needs so they can gain FAPE in the educational environment. I mean, that's kind of the synopsis, the short end of what they have to say.
Dorothy, right?
And it's all about FAPE. Yeah, like that's what everything comes down to. It's FAPE. It's free, appropriate public education. And I know it's really difficult because, people are often wondering, like, what is FAPE? What constitutes FAPE? And it can be hard to understand what does constitute FAPE. But FAPE essentially is that the child is being provided, like I said, an appropriate education. They should be making progress in what they're doing. So it's not just grades or high IQ. And again, Dorothy, you want to kind of look back at that link I left earlier that's talking about good grades. But even if the child has good grades and high IQ, they could still need an IEP and need services. And what you do is you look at these things and you document, and you try to get the school to document, or the school may have inadvertently documented some stuff for you that then you want to pull that together. And so what I mean by inadvertent documentation is, say your child is repeatedly having behavior problems and you're being called to come pick them up from school. This is something I hear quite a bit. When that happens, the school usually will not give you anything to come pick your child up. They'll just call you and say, come to the school and get them. We can't deal with them. And so, of course, being the good parent, what do? You drop everything and you go pick up your child. But the problem is when you do that and you don't get documentation, then you have no record to show. Like your child is missing information. Yes, Dorothy, actually, he is probably considered 2E. If he has high IQ along with a disability, that's what most would consider to be twice exceptional. That he's on both ends of the bell curve. So, and that's usually due to splinter skills. And then she was just saying that his grades have tanked and he went from AP honors to 100% sped this year. Yeah, see, that's completely inappropriate. That's not what should be happening. And also that just doesn't even make any sense of why you would be in AP honors and then you would be in a self-contained class within the span of 1 year. There's a whole continuum of alternative placements, is what it's called in the law. And so it would make more sense that he would be in his honor classes and then have a resource class to help him with wherever he was struggling in his honor classes, and help him probably, my guess would be, with organization, those executive functioning problems, so that he can keep up with the pace of the class. And then also in the AP class, they can reduce overall homework load. So that's another potential accommodation. Now that doesn't mean he still has to go in and pass the AP exam when you're done. It's kind of what we were talking about earlier, accommodations versus modifications. You can reduce the homework load so that it's easier for him to accomplish in a reasonable amount of time, but we're not dumbing down the material in any way. I mean, I kind of hate using that, but that's we're not making it simpler, the material simpler, the information simpler. Instead of all we're doing is we're keeping it at the same level, we're just reducing the amount that he has to do and turn in. And then for the AP test, he should qualify for additional time as an accommodation on his AP test, along with, potentially having the questions read for him or having a scribe to write for him, or, some combination of all of those things. And so she was also saying our state waiver program solely denied him based on high IQ. I would fight that, and I would fight back and appeal. And if you need to apply again and let them deny you again, so then you can appeal. But there is, again, plenty of peer-reviewed documentation that you can have people who have autism who have very high IQs, but that doesn't negate the fact that they have autism, doesn't negate the fact they have these developmental disabilities. They have impaired social ability, that it impairs them from finding and holding and retaining a job. It impairs them from further education, and it impairs them from the ability to potentially live independently. All of those things that are listed as the purpose of IDEA. So, and she said, I did all the way to a hearing, and she said, I was told to reapply. So the resolution of the hearing was you were told to reapply? Like, I've never heard of a resolution to a hearing like that. So that's kind of fascinating, because at that point, if they agreed with you, they should have just said, well, thank you for fighting for all this time. Yes, you're now allowed to the program, and just admit your child. So,
Okay.
oh, she said, no, my advocate said to. Well, yes, follow your advocate's advice and reapply, but you might want to bone up on some other information, right, as how to better support and argue this case. Dorothy says, keep trying. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. But the good news is, Dorothy, you found me and I can help you. with pulling the resources together to help prove, it is well documented you can have these children with this high cognition and have autism. So, yes, she was just saying you helped me so much, kitchen sinks. So yes, I do. I'm known to overwhelm people with all the research and information that I have. So I try not to do that on people. But I do have a whole folder on twice exceptional and autism. And I'm sure there are resources in there that will help. So
Yeah, and those are good
I'll get
keywords
through
that
those.
she can also use now to search for articles, right? I mean, twice exceptional, autism.
Yes. One of the things I'm going to work on is actually helping to put together, because I now have some additional tools, and so I'm very excited about this, that I can screen share and basically be able to show people quite literally what it is that I do when I go to research information.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things you want to look for, and a lot of people don't realize, there's a thing called Google Scholar. I know Google Scholar is awesome. So I have actually has a shortcut up on my bookmarks and my stuff because I go there so often. So for those who do not have ready access to peer-reviewed journal articles through a university, so I'm very lucky in the fact my husband and I both have our advanced degrees, a master's degree, and both of us went to different online public universities. And so therefore I have access to two different online university databases to search through. But most people don't have that kind of access. So I recommend going to Google Scholar and looking through there. And normally what you want to do is to look and refine your search under Google Scholar and make sure that you fix the dates. So you want something at this point that's 2015 or newer. Usually I start at 2017 and newer, and then start searching through everything and looking at what could help bolster your case to prove and show your child can have this high cognition and still have autism.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, Dorothy, I hope that was helpful. Have fun on Google Scholar. It's out. Ugh, I hate Google Scholar because I get on there and I'm just like, I could spend all day in Google Scholar
No,
because
and that's exactly what I love doing. And
yeah.
that's part of the reason why I do the things that I do, because I enjoy researching. I'll completely get lost all day in some research task and I love it. So that's why, if you do ever have questions, come see me. I usually have tons of research I've already pulled.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And I hope you have a great day. And of course, I always look forward to seeing you at different events around the Valley.
I know, it'll be nice, right?
Yeah,
Well, we'll also have to plot and see what we can find and we can go together. That'll be fun.
love it. All right. Have a great day. Thank you, Dorothy. And I'm glad she was helpful.
Yes, and thank you, Denise, for coming on. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, just come find me in the IEP/504 assistance group so I can help you there. And thank you so much, Michelle, for having me on. And I look forward to hearing from you in the near future.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.